The life of a real estate agent. All right. Do we have a quorum? A voting majority? I'm turning my phone around so I can't even see it. And I'm going to record. I think. You like my background? Is that the one I should have, Angela?
It's nice.
You don't care. I get bored. I bore myself. How about that? Yeah, all right. Something different. All right, I'm going to start the recording. There we go. We talked about the process of working with rentals. Today we're going to talk about forms, fun with forms. There's a handout which you should have, and I assume that Angela is pasting it in over and over and over again. And what you might, let me just start with this. The transaction coordinator that helps with the team when it comes to leases, we charge a little less, right? Not because there's less to do, but because the dollar amounts are less, right? And I'm sort of a sucker for that sort of a thing. So since you're not getting paid as much, we don't get paid as much. The amount that I charge to help people fill out the forms and things like that is also less because we're not starting with a big number typically. And so, however, the reality is that a lot of times the leasing part is more complicated, more time consuming, more difficult, and even more dangerous than what would be involved in the sale of a house. I'm not kidding. And so this is a list of the major forms. And we're going to take a peek at some of them as we go through this. And I will lead you through the process. Now, to start with, you would log into Zip Forms. You can see I'm a little behind. I haven't, done that. You can wait for it to load. Hit continue. And then let's say we're going to start with a listing. I may have mentioned this last week. If I didn't, my bad. But most of the time, the only money in a transaction is for the agent who represents the landlord, the RPO, the real property owner, and very little, if anything, is available if you're representing the tenant in residential real estate. Now, commercial real estate, we use different forms. Yes, I know the C.A.R. has commercial forms. They're not used as much in commercial real estate. I have a subscription to those forms. It's different, but the dollar amounts are different. The last commercial lease we did was $40,000 a month for an auto repair shop, right? Well, there's money in that, right? Because you're also paid a commission based on the term of the lease. Right, not 1 month's rent, but if you negotiate it, anyhow. So let's say you're staring at Zip Forms, you've logged in. You would start by clicking on New, and you'll notice that there are two choices that involve leases. One is a new lease, and the other one is a new lease listing. So if you're writing a lease, but you don't have the listing, you would just start with a new lease. If you're listing, you would obviously start with the listing. Can you add the lease to it? The answer is yes. Typically, the agent who represents the owner writes the lease. In fact, that's part of our value proposition. We're going to screen the tenants and we're going to write the lease and we're going to make sure that you fill out all the documents. Now, I've already done this. So, you can't, I don't waste too much time. And so I went ahead and put in more parties, but normally we would simply start with us. You can use the template for let's say you're at EXP and we have listing templates and buyer templates. you can use EXP's basic listing template, even though it's a lease. Because all the listing template does is have your name, your DRE number, the broker's name, the broker's DRE number, all that stuff is the same. So you would just apply the typical listing template. You put in, at this point, we're just assuming we have a landlord, and then later we find a tenant. We do the whole thing all within one transaction, including the ultimate lease. Now, usually in zip forms, you would be going across this navigation bar at the top, starting with summary, right, which gives you a summary of the, it gives you a summary. Now, the address I'm using on purpose is a commercial address for the office that I have in Morgan Hill, or it's a rental. Now, the reason I do that is that YouTube keeps deleting videos of mine because it mentions, because I'm going through some samples of residential address. Commercial addresses, yeah, you can use those and put them on YouTube, but not residential ones. So I'm just doing this if you're wondering why, that's why. You go to documents. Now, just to give you an idea of the complexity of this, the maximum number of documents you can load into zip forms and send out for signatures is 20 in one batch, 20. There are more than 20 lease documents that you could be adding. Now, how many you're going to add depends upon a couple of factors. Number one, can you resist temptation? And if you're wondering, what are you talking about? So when we list the property, we're going to put it in the MLS. And we're not putting it in the MLS because other agents are going to show it or anything like that. We're putting it in the MLS because once it's in the MLS, the different CRMs can make marketing materials, social media posts, Craigslist ads, and it's syndicated to websites like Realtor.com, Homes.com, and all the real estate agent websites. Now, out of that, but not Zillow. And the reason not Zillow is Zillow doesn't syndicate listings because they want you to go to Zillow and manually put it in. Do you have to be the owner to do that? No, you can be an agent. Just say, I'm an agent. They'll say, okay. Do you have to pay them to do it? The answer is no, you don't have to pay them. So we put it in the MLS. And so there's two paths now. There's the Zillow path, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And then there's, let's just call the California Association of Realtors MLS path. Now, the listing, all right, that's a simple thing to do. Now we need applications for people to apply to be a renter, and we need a lease. This is the temptation part. Because if you go to Zillow, Zillow has their own application, which I admit I use it when I'm putting it in Zillow. If you're doing it through the MLS and you get Realtor.com, Homes.com, both who have a lot of leasing tenant kind of stuff, you need to use a different system for writing the application or having them fill out the application. Now, C.A.R. has an application. You can see it's right here. I'm highlighting it. I don't think I've ever used it, the application. I don't think I ever have. Because Rent Spree, which is the company that C.A.R. has a member benefit with, is a screening portal, and they have their own application, which is okay. So Zillow's application, I just go with it. Rent Spree's, I go with it. That's not the temptation. So now that we've got an application and we've picked somebody, it's time to write the lease. Here's the temptation. Zillow has a lease, Rent Spree has a lease. So simple. You've already got the information in their system. They would merge the fields, send it for signatures. So easy. But resist. And the reason is that those leases are designed to be used anywhere in the United States. We're in California. We are special. We have bed bug disclosure, a California consumer privacy disclosure. We have a whole bunch. You're going to see. We have a whole bunch. The rent cap just cause eviction disclosure. There's a whole bunch of them. So if you're using the rent spree lease or the Zillow lease, first of all, your broker's not going to like it. And the broker is going to be insisting that you do all these other forms. Now, the advantage of the C.A.R. form is it bundles together all those other, I'll call them miscellaneous disclosures. They're all bound in one package. And if you use rent spree's lease or you use the Zillow lease, you're going to also have to get all those forms individually filled out. No, now it's no longer easy. One of the big advantages of Zillow, which by the way does generate the most rental applicants, is that Zillow has this system where the tenants can pay them once for a screening, that means credit check and other things, and then they don't have to pay again. So if they go for one apartment and they don't get accepted, they don't have to get another credit check for the next one. So everyone I've ever screened on Zillow already had a credit check, which Zillow showed me. Now, Rent Spree, the other program, no one in that program already had their package. You send them a link, they can pay for it, but here's the big but. If you don't rent to them and they paid for the rent screen, you have to refund their money. So you don't want 10 people to apply and you screen all 10 of them. You don't want to do that. Because 9 of them, you're going to have to give them their money back. Zillow, you don't have to do that most of the time because they've already paid once and they're using it for multiple rentals. Any questions about that so far? I can't see all of your faces, but I'm assuming there's a look of curiosity and excitement. All right. So we're going to start with the lease listing agreement. So, yeah, and I've already created a workspace which has way too many. I don't know why it didn't load. So date prepared. Most of this looks like any typical lease. eXp Realty is the broker, the beginning date, most of the rules regulating you can only have an agreement for a certain amount of time and all that other kind of stuff. Most of those do not apply to leases. The NAR settlement on commissions does not apply to leases. The California Civil Code section on buyer representation and compensation, and that does not apply to leases. So is it legal under the NAR settlement for you to say how much commission you want to pay in the MLS if it's on a lease? Technically, yes, but the MLS won't let you do it because they don't want to have different rules for, it's too complicated. So they just are going to tell you not to do it, and you don't need to do it because no agent is probably going to ever show it. It's never going to do anything. Rent amount. All right, now this I mentioned in the last class is you're going to have to help them maybe determine how much they're going to rent it for. Let's say you're in my area, $4,000 a month would be relatively cheap, even for some condos and townhomes. And that would be, you could say, per month. And then the security deposit, I discussed this last week, and I added some of that information to the handout from last week. If people, by the way, are asking for it, it's in the YouTube description from that last one I did. I'm sure Angela, if you Zelled her $5 or $10, would put the link in at the end. But basically what it says is the standard rule is 1 month rent for the security deposit. But if you're a small landlord, that means a human or an LLC owned entirely by humans, and you don't have a bunch of them, you're only doing like 1 or 2, I think what the number is up to 4, then you could charge 2 months rent. You need to get this right. I'm just telling you, right? If you charge too much for the security deposit, it's going to, well, be illegal. And an illegal contract is unenforceable. You just invalidated your lease. And by the way, security deposit is any money that is collected in advance other than the first month's rent. It doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it a pet deposit, you can call it a cleaning deposit, a deposit, it doesn't matter. It's a security deposit. And it's all regulated under the rules of security deposits. Now, notice there's a form, the SDDA, which I believe is on my list, which explains the rules around security deposits. Type of tenancy, month to month, and real estate agents. I saw something there. I'm not sure what it is, but anyhow, real estate agents like to check boxes. And so what would make this simpler is to click on it's a 1-year lease. I don't know why it's not letting me check. It'll allow me to check that, but it won't allow me. I don't know why, right? I don't know. That's awful weird. And now it's not even letting me. But the answer is we probably want other. And I, for some reason, cannot get that box to uncheck right now. Right. And there's something weird with the 1 year, but I would say other. Remember, we're pretending month to month is not checked. And the other would be, boy, something is hanging up. 11 months. Why? Well, the just cause eviction rules in the state of California kick in when a tenant has been in the property for 1 year. So if you sign a 1-year lease with people, they are tenants for life. Right? The ability to kick them out is now severely limited. So I always put in 11 months. It's let's call it a engagement period. And then the owner and the tenant can decide if they want to, put a ring on it, right? But that's my suggestion. If you do, and by the way, in residential leases, we rarely do more than 1 year. So 11 months, almost a year, it means you have less liabilities. Items included in the lease, this, you can write things in because it makes a real property owner. I don't know why it's doing weird stuff. I don't know why, right? It's still not letting me uncheck that. You can write stuff in here. However, the actual lease is what controls. What is this doing? I don't know. I don't know why it's doing it. Turn off quote. All right. So, for example, the storage shed in the back. The owner says, I don't want them to have that. I got stuff in it. I want to keep my stuff in it. All right. Well, we write in storage shed in the back are going to be excluded. Right, we do that later, right? This would be, but anyhow, items excluded, garage, carport. This is where we would write in the thing in the back. Maybe the owner says you can use something that I have that's personal property. I'll leave the TV, I'll leave, whatever. The personal property not be maintained or replaced by RPO. That's the real property owner. The following items are being left on the premises as occurring not warranted, nor will they be maintained or replaced. TVs, things like that. A microwave on the counter, things like that. Additional terms, most of the time, if you're writing stuff in here, you're making a mistake. Most of the time, but that's up to you. Sometimes they have other terms. They say, I can't think of any because I never write in anything there. Compensation. It starts with the magic words required by the California Civil Code that any contract to obligate somebody to pay a real estate agent a commission has to contain these words. There they are. There's an advisory. For fixed term leases, you could put in a percent. If you're asking me what percent would I put in, 5 to 6%. Or what we typically do is I would put in $4,000. So if you took 4,000 times 12 times 6%, it comes out pretty close to $4,000, but that's up to you. Additional compensation, what would that be? Let's say you're paying to have the place cleaned. You're getting a stager to stage it for some reason. We usually don't do that on rentals, but you could. If it was an expensive one, we would do it. Typically, we're not writing in anything there. If you're really cheap and you're paying the transaction coordinator something, you could write it in. If you're going to spend money on advertising, you could write it in, right? We're not getting paid as much, right? You understand? For month to month, it would be, notice we're just doing the fixed term lease. Usually we don't get paid very much if it's month to month, right? Because they could move out next month and then, it's a lot easier if it's a lease for, and generally speaking, we don't, as real estate agents, get involved in a lot of month-to-month rentals. And then it asks the first one, the completed RPO default, what this is basically saying, and this is called the broker safety clause or whatever, it says that if we get a ready, willing, and able tenant whose offer on the lease terms or any other price and terms accepted, and then they decide not to rent them, they owe us $4,000. That's what A says. Does everybody understand? That, by the way, is almost the same wording as in the residential lease agreement, that if the landlord in this case decides not to go through with the lease for somebody that we found that qualifies technically, they owe us $4,000. Now, I've been doing this for a while, and for both real property listing agreements and lease listing agreements, I don't know of any case where we've actually sued the owner to get them to pay us a commission when it didn't actually go through, right? But you understand, this is not a way to build up a sphere of influence and a referral base. Suing people when you didn't actually consummate the lease, just saying. B says, just like in the residential listing agreement, if within so many calendar days, put in 90, if you're looking for something, if somebody that we found that was interested comes back and rents it, then you owe us a commission. How would you know? I don't know. All right. And now the rest of this is kind of, straightforward. You could compensation on the subsequent sale to tenant. Now, I have a person on my team, it's commercial, but is working on what's called a lease option. It could be residential. Now, this is more complicated, right? You basically are taking the lease agreement and you're taking the option agreement and you're merging them together, right? And so do you want to be paid a commission if the tenant you found eventually ends up buying the property? I'll bet you do, right? I'll bet you would. If so, check the box. If you're not doing a lease option, the chances of this happening is very, additional compensation to a broker if tenant is unrepresented. We usually don't do this. You should expect that the tenant doesn't have an agent in residential. I'm just saying, you should just expect that. And if you want more money, go ahead. I never do that. Right? I just don't check that box. I don't get involved. Now, if it were commercial, that would be different. Doing a $40,000 a month lease is very different than the $4,000 a month, besides the fact that it's 10 times more. In commercial, it's much more complicated, but I generally would not check F or G. Compensation obligations, you would be asking, have you had the property on the market before? By the way, if you checked some of the different portals, like even if you took the address and pasted it into Google, it would probably tell you, and so would AI, if it's been on the lease market in some place where it could be found before. That's always, by the way, a useful thing to do. Take the address ask ChatGPT, ask Gemini, paste it into Google, see what comes up. And if they've had a listing agreement with somebody else recently, there's that safety period. We put in 90 days. So they might still be obligated to pay somebody else. You want to find out. Compensation obligation to tenant brokers. Many tenants do not have funds to pay their own agent. We don't, that's too bad. Usually they don't have one in residential, but often in commercial. If you're getting a referral fee, like somebody referred this to you and you're giving them, I don't know, $500, you check that box. When do you get paid? Which means when is the landlord paid? So first month rent goes to the RPO. Don't check to the broker. Don't check it's due. Don't check those boxes, right? The following are due and payable to the RPO, first month's rent, and that would typically be on execution. It's not letting me check it. I don't know why. And the security don't check to the broker would typically be due at execution, but none of this matters because this is all about the lease is going to tell the tenant when they have to pay their security deposit. You can just leave this blank, but if you want to check boxes, check execution. Electronic rental payments. Many landlords would prefer that they get the money by Zelle. Many of them have an app on their phone. There's lots of apps where it helps landlords rent property and the tenant can pay. If there's going to be a lockbox on the property or a combo box, you would check that because there's another form. If they're letting you have a sign, you would check that because of that. You are going to, it will be put into the multiple listing service if for some reason they don't want to. You check that. Insurance, ownership and title. This is asking the question, do you really own this property? Do you have a legal right to lease it and sign the lease? It's a good question. If we looked it up in our software, we would know if the owner of the property is the person you're talking to. The rest of this is just, general stuff. B is a form that we're going to talk about briefly, the RPOD, which is within 3 days of completion. And the RPO, that's the landlord, authorizes broker to provide tenant with the RPOD with any lease or rental agreement, and that they're going to do an intake form, which is the R point, within 3 days or request. So and I'm not going to have a chance to go through all of these various forms, but I wanted you to see what they are. This is the RPOD, right? And there isn't a lot here that I wanted to talk about. The RPOD is the rental equivalent of an SPQ. Best way to put it. The TDS, the transfer disclosure law, does not apply to rentals. However, and notice the red boxes. What does that signify? Well, it signifies that you, as the agent who's filling it out, cannot fill out this part because you have to email it to the landlord, the RPO, and have them fill it out. And it asks questions like, when was it built? If it was before January 1st, 78, then there's lead-based paint disclosures. They ask a bunch of questions. Have you been making meth in your basement? Yes or no? Right. Submeters, mold. If they say, yes, there's mold, we've had mold, that triggers another disclosure, a mold advisory. You know, if there's asbestos, is there an HOA? Is there military ordnance? Other material facts. You need to fill this out. There's a rental property owner advisory that is attached that explains a lot of this stuff. This would be a good thing for you to read too. There's the Fair Housing Discrimination Advisory, which is a good thing to go over because they can't just not rent to some people because they don't like those people. It all depends on why they don't like the people. And this looks like I have it twice. So this R pod, I didn't really need to add it, is attached at the end of the bundle. But anyhow, there's 2 copies of it. I'm gonna drop this down. All right. So what else on this list? Rent cap and just cause eviction. Now, let's go to the other document. All right, and there's compensation agreements and other fun stuff, animal terms, bed bugs, flood hazard. Remember, last week I mentioned that it costs about $20, get a tenant NHD report, because there's certain things that are on the natural hazard disclosure that the owner of the property is required to disclose. Move in, move out, instructions, extension, lease, mold, photo, radon, gas, cancellation, key safe. Where is it? Where is it? All right. I don't know. Let me lease rental. Here, let me do this. Application. Lease. This is what I was looking for. And we drag it up. All right. And to make things simple, I may drag this down. Are there any questions about the listing? Oh, well, it doesn't want. So here's the lease. And unfortunately, I and the transaction coordinator know how to fill out this form. It's fortunate for you, but we would just as soon, not fill out the form. That's not the right one. Here, I want to get this out of here. Well, I don't know why. Here we go. So date, so now we have a tenant, we're filling out the lease. We have the address. Most of this looks very similar. First of all, the premises are for the sole use as a personal residence by the following named persons only. You want all the tenants. If it's a couple, both of them, right? If it's a children, you could write them in. And the reason we're doing that is because if other people start living there and they're not on this list, the tenant has violated the terms of the lease. And violating the terms of the lease is justification to evict them. Like, you have to give them notice, you have to threaten them. But you definitely, a lot of times when I see agents that have filled this out, they leave 1B blank. So that means any number of people can live there. And they don't even have to be the people. They could sublet, they could do whatever they want. Any guests are not permitted to stay more than 14 days without written consent. C is personal property that is included. D is they may be subject to local rent or eviction control. I mentioned this last time. You need to search the address, the city, and the county and see, are there any additional rent control? Because what C.A.R. has bundled here is the rent control for the state of California, but your city, Los Angeles, Berkeley, Alameda County, San Francisco, San Jose, that's not a complete list, have their own rent control laws. And as an agent representing a landlord, you ought to know what they are. And if they always have brochures and things, you ought to share them with the seller. The term, beginning on a certain date, and then I would go lease, right? Could be month to month, but it shall terminate on, and what you want to do is go, I think that's right, 11 months. You want to make sure it's not 12. And you can write in it's been one of those things. All right, 12 o'clock. So I'm partly doing military time. How about this? 12 o'clock p.m. All right, there we go. You can do what you want. Tenant agrees to pay $4,000, payable on the 1st of each calendar day. Now, it can sometimes be prorated. right? There's a place for us to do that. Right, so let's say it's the 15th is when they're moving in, they have half of a month, they begin on the first of the next month with the full rent payment. How is it being paid? Most times they want wire or electronic transfer to RPO. You do not want them to pay you. One of the agents, by the way, the commission, she told the landlord to just write her a check. Right? She got to meet, well, didn't quite make it to lawyers, but got to have heart-to-heart conversations with the California broker. It violates the California Business and Professions Code. And you don't want them giving you a personal check for you to pay the landlord. Don't do it. What if they're a relative? It's still illegal. Don't do it. Payment via apps like PayPal or Venmo will usually, my clients say, yeah, I want Venmo. Do it. You know, happens right away. You can set it up automatically. They just as soon have that than a check, money order, or cashier's check. Rent shall be delivered to, you would put in the name, I forget the name of the RPO for this one, Laura Landlord, I guess. You put in their phone number, you put in their address. Sometimes they don't want to they want the tenants to have it. Leave it blank. Don't fight with them. Could it be paid personally? Could they go see, well, if you give them their address, they might show up and pound on the landlord's door with the check. Most of them don't want to do that. Non-sufficient funds, this is D3, may in writing require to pay in cash for 3 months and or a money order or a cashier's check, right? What if they're bouncing checks? Well, not if they fail to pay. See, that's why we want Zelle or PayPal or Venmo or something else, because it doesn't bounce. Tenant agrees to pay a security deposit of $4,000. It will be transferred and held by the owner of the premises, not in the owner's broker's trust account. Do not check that box. Most residential brokerages don't have one. EXP doesn't. EXP Commercial does, but that's very different. Then this has a paragraph explaining that they can't use the security deposit as the last month's rent, but they're probably going to do it. Now, this box, you might need, do I have time? So you might have a prorated amount and moving costs. And so what we would do is, let's just say, we're going to make this simple on ourselves, and we're going to say we want the month of March, right, when they move in. And that's $4,000. How much have they paid us? Well, right now, nothing. When is it due? Well, let's just say, you could say the first. We might say we want it a little earlier. This is probably a Sunday. The security deposit, again, it could be $8,000 if they are humans. And the LLC, have they given you, when is it due? We would generally have it a little bit before. Is there other things we could do? Well, you can't tell people they can't have a pet, because the pet might be a legitimate, what is it called? Support animal, a guide dog or something like that. However, you can charge more rent. I see a lot of times $50 or more a month, and or have a additional security deposit for the pet, a pet deposit. Now, you have to remember that the pet deposit would be considered part of a security deposit, but if you're not charging the full security deposit, then you could add something to it. If you are charging the full security deposit, which would be $8,000, then you would add that $50 or whatever to the rent. Right now it's 4,050 or 4,075. Right, if they have a pair of Great Danes, you might make it even more, right? Because you know there's going to be issues, right? Normally, we're not writing in other stuff. And we would say we want it all before the 28th. There's a section here about late or return checks. I never have to deal with this because all my people want electronic transfers of the money. So we're not bouncing checks. Who does that? I don't know. Checks. If any installment or rent due from the tenant is not received, provided within 5 calendar days, or if a check is returned, tenant shall pay an additional sum of, you have to write something in. Right now, we usually put in $25. Doesn't have to be. There's a limit on how much you can charge. Right? You could put in a percentage, but it can't exceed the amount. Again, have them electronically, You have to answer questions about parking. Is there parking included? Is the parking on the street? Write it in. Is there a garage? If there is, the right to parking is included. If it's a garage, but you can't use it, it's not included. If it's not included, the parking rental fee shall be an additional. We never check that box. Usually this is what we're checking, right? But maybe the landlord says you can use the garage, but you got to pay me an extra $50 a month. I don't know. That never comes up. Parking is not permitted on the real property. Sometimes that's true because the only thing they have is a driveway, but that would mean street parking, right? Do they have storage? Sometimes they have a storage shed in the back. Is that included? Can they use it? And you could say a shed in backyard. And that it is included. You could pack B, except for the tenant's personal property, entirely within the premises. Storage is not permitted. You don't want them filling up the garage with stuff. Utilities. Now, most of the time, you don't have sub-meters and a different way of breaking out the utilities for the landlord and the tenant. Tenant agrees to pay for all utilities and services and the following charges: internet, cable TV, whatever, but not internet, cable TV, which is paid by the housing provider, or there could be a separate agreement. Usually we just leave it blank. Now, sometimes the landlord says, I'll pay for the utilities. You'll see that's coming up. Are there sub-meters? Like, for example, if it's a duplex, triplex, fourplex, there could be sub-meters where everybody has their own water sub-meter, and then that's usually billed. Notice there's a water sub-meter addendum. Of course there is. There's a gas meter. If you check it, the premises does not have a separate gas meter as the default. Electric meter, they don't have usually we don't check these boxes, A, B, and C. Condition of the premises. I mentioned last week, there's a new law. Of course there is. That says that you need to take the owner of the property, which means the agent, needs to take pictures of the property to memorialize what the property looks like when the tenant moves in. So later, when the tenant moves out and you're saying, oh, there's a scratch on the counter, you broke the counter, and then the tenant says, no, that was here when we moved in, right? You need to go look at the pictures. So A says the tenant's acknowledgement of the condition of the property of these items is in an attached statement called the MII, the move-in inspection. And what we typically do is we check this, that adds that form, notice it's here. And what you would do, you or the RPO, but usually I ended up doing this, is you go through the premises with the tenants and you say, do you see anything wrong in the kitchen? See anything that looks broken? Do you think anything, we'll turn the stove on, see it all works, we'll run the dishwasher maybe, If there is one, the oven, notice it all works, there's no scratches, you see there, right, sign here. Right, attach pictures. If you haven't done that, you would check, if you're not doing that before they move in, you would then check B, that we're going to give them one of these within 3 days after execution of the agreement, if you don't already have one. That's a very common one, right? But, and this is the lazy one, which I have to admit, I oftentimes do, but it could lead to more of a, conflict, which basically 10C says it's up to you as the tenant to look to the property and give us a list of anything you see that looks broken, damaged, or whatever, or don't complain later. Right? But it's safer if you have the move-in inspection. Right? And then they look at it and they sign it. Refrigerators. The California law says they have to have one. Doesn't say freezer, says refrigerator. Doesn't say anything about size. Doesn't have to be a big one. Tenant might say, I got my own. I got a better one than you do. Great, check the box. Maintenance and use. This is one of the other areas that you have to think about. Who is going to take care of the garden, the landscaping, trees, and shrubs? Oftentimes that's the housing provider. It could be the tenant, but then you're relying on the tenant to water I don't know. The HOA, sometimes they do. Then the next one, who is going to maintain the garden, landscaping, trees, and shrubs, like trimming, weeding, fertilizing, I don't know, right? Usually it's the housing provider. And is there something else you want the tenant to do or the housing? Usually we don't check anything in D. Periodic pest control. If you've run a termite report, which we almost never do, just saying, then there could be in the lease a agreement. You would give them a copy of the termite report, and you would say every year we're going to have, one of the termite companies come out and do a follow-up. Free of infestation of pests and vermin is a part of the California law on habitability. So if there's cockroaches, termites, rats, mice, snakes running around, the landlord's supposed to get rid of them. And so sometimes, usually we're not getting into this. We may leave it blank because we're not doing it. But it could be that you've had a termite inspection done and you want to include it. It's not a bad idea. If I were representing a tenant, I might be saying, well, we want to make sure there's no termites and things like that. But usually you don't see them unless, it hurts the landlord more than the tenant. Personal property items, again, that would be a television and things like that. Tenant shall not use the premises to plant, grow, cultivate, or sell marijuana. It's a default setting. You could change it, especially if you want them to give you some as the landlord. I don't know. Smoking is not a protected class. So you can say, I'm not going to rent anybody who smokes, because there's another law that triggers on the third party, tobacco smell, toxicity, right? Tobacco has become the new asbestos. So usually you say, we don't want you, no smoking of any substances allowed if it does occur on or the common areas. Tenant is a material breach of this agreement, and they may be required to leave. And you could say you can only smoke certain things. I don't know. Usually we don't check that box. Rules and regulations, it wouldn't be bad to have some. I have some samples. Artificial intelligence could have samples. The internet knows some common sense rules and, regulations, right? No loud music after 10 o'clock, whatever, right? If you've got them, you would check the box. If you're going to give it to them, you check box 1. If you've already given it to them, you check box 2. If it's a condominium or a PUD, does anybody know, while I take a sip of soup, who can tell me what a PUD is? Is anybody still left? Anybody answer that? Also known as a PUD, a PUD. We use a different word for them. We call them townhouses. A townhouse is technically a planned unit development. If it's a condominium or a townhouse, you check that box. What's the issue? HOA. You would put in the name of the HOA. You would, housing provider will, within so many days, give them a copy of the HOA rules, because they got rules. Or B, or 2, you would check the box that says we've already given it to you. Alterations or repairs, it says you can't do anything without the landlord's permission. Keys and locks. Notice how specific this is. Are there keys to the mailbox? Or how many keys to the premises are there? Are there keys to common areas like a swimming pool or a little tot lot? Are there remote control devices for the garage? Of course, nowadays you can have an app on the phone and, access it that way. But if you have the old-fashioned clickers, you would check the box and write in the number. Tenant acknowledges that the locks have or have not been rekeyed. Right? Well, what's the issue? Well, if they have not been rekeyed, the previous tenant might be able to get in. Which means usually we rekey when a tenant moves out, because you can't trust them. Right? They might come back. So hopefully you're checking that box. What I see, by the way, is, and what Rob, the transaction coordinator, what we're dealing with is agents who have taken a stab at this and they've checked nothing. All right, they've checked virtually no boxes. All they've written in is the amount of the rent and the term of the lease, and it's always for a year. But anyhow, that's the burden that I have. It says you cannot assign or sublet. It says there's photographs that are going to go on the internet. Right, Craigslist. You put it in the MLS, you put it on Zillow. If they say, I don't want to, guess what? There's another form. And I don't know, I know it's on my list. There's a form, seller instructions to exclude listing from the internet. Of course, that's going to make it kind of hard for you to rent it. But you could have a sign in front. It says they cannot sublet. It also says that's a 23A, 23B, but by the way, the subletting says if you were to do it, you'd need the permission of the owner of the property. 23B says you can't use it for short-term rentals. Now you could check a box and allow it for short-term rentals. Sometimes you're renting it out to somebody so they can use it for short-term rentals. Usually we don't, because they don't want it used for short-term rentals. They've read all of the horror stories of what the tenants do to short-term rentals. Possession. Tenant is not in possession of the premises. That's typical. When would they be in possession of the premises? Well, if this is a lease option, they're leasing it and now they have an option to buy it, or they're leasing it and decide they want to buy it, we would check that box. Normally we do not. And this just says that we have to give possession within 5 calendar days after commencement date, which we put down for the first of the month. Tenant's obligations on vacating, it says you're supposed to move all your crap out. No debris, personal property, everything. Clean and deliver premises. By the way, the law does not say professionally clean. I hear agents saying that all the time. Well, you have to have it professionally clean, or we're going to keep your clean. It's good luck, right? The only times that this has actually been litigated, first of all, the security deposit cannot be used for normal wear and tear. The carpets have been there for 15 years. they need to be replaced. You can't take that out of the security deposit. Now, the children of the tenant have done artwork on the wall. Well, that's damage, and you can deduct to repair that. Where was I going with it? Oh, the only time this has been litigated as to how clean is clean, a court said it had to be broom clean, free of debris, personal property. Doesn't say everything. Now, normally we deduct it from them anyhow. Then there's a right to move out inspection and repairs. And there's a form, of course there is, which is a move out form, where they can go through and say, and we can say, you broke this, you messed up that, we're gonna have to do this, all that kind of stuff. Breach of contract, early termination. If they signed an 11-month lease and in 4 months they want out, what can you do? Well, you could keep their deposit. Now, remember, it says the deposit is not supposed to be used for last month's rent, but this is what tenants are going to do. They're going to say, all right, well, we're leaving. Oh, you can't. You got an 11-month lease. Yeah, we're leaving. Well, you still owe me for the last month. You keep the security deposit. I'm moving. What are you going to do? Now, California law says that you as the landlord have an obligation to mitigate damages, which means you have to put it back on the market and rent it as fast as you can. You can't just let it sit empty and be demanding that they pay you rent every month. Insurance. You can do a little bit of research. Oftentimes we don't do this, but would it be good for the tenant to have liability insurance? Now, the homeowner has, and by the way, the owner of the property ought to tell their homeowner insurance provider that they're leasing it out, because they'll give them a rider for doing it. But what if the tenant has an original Monet painting and the house burns down and they're now wanting you to compensate them for their expensive artwork? That, well, you could require this. And I would get a couple of quotes. Most of the time, I'm just saying, I don't see anything written in here. Does everybody understand the issue, right? Their stuff might get stolen or damaged, and they ought to have tenant coverage, which they can get from the insurance. If you talked to the RPO's insurance company and said, look, we're going to rent it out, and they'll say, okay, great. We have a rider for that. Oh, by the way, do you offer policies for the tenants? Yes, we do. Great, send me a brochure. And then you would write in the dollar amounts that they have. Does anybody have water beds? I don't know. Portable dishwashers, portable washing machines. If we're, market, the tenant we can increase their security deposit to 1.5 months of one rent if they have a water bed. It's another good reason not to have them. What else is here? Notice. This is where would you give a notice to the landlord? Usually it's either the landlord gives up their address or they have a PO box, and the tenant notice typically would be the premises. But they might say, I have a PO box. You should put that in, because if you're going to try to evict them and you're serving them with the 3-day notice to pay or quit, you're supposed to send it to the right spot. Estoppel certificates are something that if the property is being bought and they want to keep the tenants, the buyer, they want the tenants to fill out this form that says how much rent they're paying, what the security deposit is and other things. And this says they have to do it. Paragraph 34. If they don't, they're in violation of the lease and you could, try to evict them. The rest of this is just, basic stuff, very similar. The residential environmental hazards booklet, you're required to give them a copy. Most agents don't. They have no idea what this is. And how do we, in a typical residential transaction, give a copy to a buyer? And the answer is it's in the NHD report. If you look in a typical NHD report, it's got links to them. If you get an NHD tenant report, what you ought to do, it will have the links to it and then you can check the box. If you don't give them the hazards booklets, there's a bunch of them: earthquake, environmental, flood, fire. There's a whole bunch of, it sounds like, biblical pestilence, but it's all there. And get them, it's only $20 to get a tenant NHD report. It's got links. And by the way, if you're old school, if you go into C.A.R. and go into zip forms and you go into the libraries and you pick EPUBs, you can get a copy of them. Right. Give you a copy. By the way, the home warranty companies would give you a printed copy, but who does that? Typically, when we're filling this out, we are simply checking these boxes. I didn't put in DRE number and stuff like that because I was in a hurry. Normally, there's no tenant brokerage. Anyhow, disclosure is the term of this agreement exceeds 1 year. We don't want it to exceed 1 year. If it is, we usually include the agency disclosure does not apply to rentals unless they're more than a year, more than 11 months. It's not really required, but you could give it to them anyhow. Termination of agency relationship. I usually pick occupancy. Once they've moved in, we're done. Right? You don't want to have an ongoing relationship because that's property management. We're not going to get, if they did have a tenants broker, you'd be filling this out. That rarely happens. Move out funds, how much goes to who? We normally aren't checking this box or filling it out. But this would be if we had a trust account and we had their money in it, we get to keep some and we'll send some back. Other terms and conditions, is there going to be a lockbox or a combo box on the property? Tenants don't want one. I'm just saying. If it was built before 78, we need lead-based paint. If there's evidence of mold, we want the mold and ventilation addendum. If we're giving them parking and storage, we want that one. Yeah. Fun with forms. Translator, interpreter, who's managing it, the property manager. So premises are being managed by the owner. We usually don't write in anything else. If they've got their own manager, they're the ones renting it out, not us. And then what else? I'm running out of time. I've covered most of the lease. My computer is tired. There's obviously, I don't know, but you can read the bed bug disclosure, tenant flood, hazard disclosure, rent cap. By the way, one more thing, rent cap and just cause eviction. This is important. See the box, notice of exemption. If the owner of the property is a human being, and it's a property containing 2 separate dwelling units, excluding ADUs and junior ADUs. But look at 3, single family residential property, including blah, 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 that is alienable, separate from the title to other dwellings. That means you can sell it separately if the notice below is checked and delivered to the tenant. So if it's a single family home, which would include a condo or townhome, and the owner is not a real estate investment trust, a corporation, a limited liability corporation, in which one member is a corporation. Now, by the way, that is virtually all the landlords we work with. Check the box, notice of exemption, and that means they don't have to comply with all of the rent cap and just cause eviction notices. And that's my last important thing. There's more forms, but I see even Angela has left, so we've reached the end of our any questions? This is your chance. And if you're on my team and you're doing a lease, talk to me. Our transaction coordinator knows how to fill one out too. It'll save you a lot of time. All right,
All right,
That's
thank you,
it.
Michael.
yeah. Was that you, Khalid?
Yes.
Was that a question or you're just saying?
No, I was just saying thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
All right, bye-bye.